Hello there and welcome to this Astranti video where we'll be going through the interim examiner's report for the SCS November 2021 exam sitting. Now you can find this report for yourself if you go to the planner.cimaglobal.com login page, log in with your CIMA credentials, navigate to the SCS module and filter your results to November 2021. Now, as for the report itself, it's worth taking note that you don't need to know the information in this report in order to pass the February 2022 exam. The report doesn't contain hints of what came up in the previous exam nor what will come up. However, it can be useful for identifying what students did well in, what they need to improve on for the exam, and if you're resitting this exam, you may find the information here especially useful as you may recognize things you did in the examiner's wording. So starting off, we have some general comments about Pixlwizz, which is our precinct company. And the one key point to raise here is that you're expected to know the nature of the industry. We're told here that you've got to know the nature of the industry and where Pixlwizz exists inside it. Now, hopefully you know this already, but obviously Pixlwizz is part of the video game industry, or it's a company that exists and operates within the video game industry. And just off the top of my head, cloud gaming is one such trend that is given some attention in the pre-scene and is also a major part of current industry trends. So having a knowledge of the industry and the connections that can be made between the pre-scene company and the real world will do you a lot of good for the exam. Now the meat of the report and the meat of this video will be in going through these core activities. And you may recall that for SCS we have 5 core activities and you'll be marked based on your ability to essentially answer each of these types of questions. Now the first one is on developing a business strategy. So in the exam, this will frequently involve you needing to evaluate strategic opportunities for the business and make recommendations using various models. So we can see here, make recommendations may be developed or supported by referring to some of the strategic decision-making models. So that might include things like suitability, acceptability, and feasibility, or SAAF. And that's a good model to use in this respect. And just there are many others as well that you may have revised and know about that you can also apply in the exam. Now the part I want to pay particular attention to are the level 3 and level 1 answers. Because in understanding what makes the answer good, you can hopefully see what it is you need to do when actually giving a response. So we can see here that level 3 answers offer clear and practical recommendations, that they relate to the pre-scene company as closely as possible, in this case Pixlwizz, and the recommendation should be, crucially, well justified. In other words, this means you need to be direct in the answers you give, okay? You must give recommendations that are practical, you don't waffle around, you don't make vague responses, you have to be absolutely clear in what it is you're suggesting. Because the senior managers or the board are going to want answers that they can act upon, and giving vague around the question answers are not going to cut it at this level. You need to be firm in your response. So this is where things like industry examples might be very useful in this respect, because they can help you justify an answer you give based on precedent within the real world. However, do note for level 3 answers, you do also need to make sure it relates to Pixlwizz as a company, alright? Giving industry examples is good, but giving ones that don't make sense to the question or your response could end up doing more harm than good in the end. Now, level 1 answers, and this is something you're going to see as a trend over this video, is that they tend to be very descriptive. They lack depth in the analysis, and as a result, they will not be achieving higher marks. If we just take a quick look, level 1 answers frequently lacked a clear recommendation, going back to my point about making sure your answer is not vague. In the real world, a vague response would not be well received by a senior manager. Remember, you are a person working at this company, and if you were asked by your boss to give some sort of answer to a question they gave you, and you gave a vague response, they would not be pleased with you at all. And the bit at the bottom here is very important for your exam technique. Bear in mind that while the examiner or the marker may have a different idea of what approach they would take, your response will still be accepted provided it is logical and relevant. There are infinite answers potentially to any given question. Some more so than others. But As a result, especially when dealing with business strategy, of which there isn't really a truly correct answer, your answer will be marked based on its merits rather than it being just categorically the right answer. There is no such right answer. So just make sure it's relevant and logical and you will gain marks. Then for the second the second core activity rather, this is on the economic environment and will include things like being able to respond to the broader business environment as a whole. So you need to make sure you are appreciative of the governmental, economical, stakeholder reactions to various issues, etc. Now, as with the previous core activity, similar themes here. You'll need to make sure that any answers you give are relevant to the issues arising from Pixlwizz's environment. So you need to give unequivocal answers to questions rather than giving vague, uninformed responses. There isn't really much more to say about this because it's all just sort of regurgitating what we discussed before as far as like substantial material to know for this core activity. Just make sure you give direct responses. As for core activity 3 then, recommending finances strategies, this is crucially your F3 topic more than anything, right? This is where you will be expected to apply information concerning raising funds, dividend policies, increasing shareholder wealth, etc. So just bear that in mind with core activity 3. So we can see here, you've got to make sure that you give answers that aim to maximize shareholder wealth. And it's also important to be aware of various theories and models. So in F3, you may have theories like, say, Modigliani and Miller's. You might have to apply that, or like to apply it rather, not have to apply, but might like to apply it. And crucially, you need to be technically strong when it comes to applying these things, because part of level 3 answer is demonstrating a strong grasp of underlying theories and models when it comes to specific issues. So if you're technically uncertain about your response or the way in which a theory applies, that will come across and that will affect your answers. So make sure you have a good grounding of what theories you know and how to apply them. Now, the example we're given here as well as to what makes a good level 3 answer is when it concerns a funding decision, that you should be able to take account of the nature of the investment and the current company's financial position, i.e. what is Pixlwizz's financial position. So remember, any funding decision that the company has to make, you will need to give a recommendation taking into account things like, what is Pixlwizz's gearing? If debt is raised, will it make it untenable? How will shareholders react to a change in dividend policy if that's going to be required? You need to look at Pixlwizz's financial statements, show that you understand the consequences of a financial decision on Pixlwizz, and also consider the responses of various stakeholders, including shareholders as well, to those decisions. Level 1, on the other hand, will just repeat study text material, okay? It's going to be very descriptive. It's not going to be applying that information, crucially, to the preceding company. The examiner has noted that students frequently regurgitate study text material when answering questions to this core activity. So bear that in mind when you get questions on finance. Try to avoid that common pitfall. If you're asked to comment on a recent share price movement, you need to make sure you directly address that aspect of the question as well. Do not ignore it. Do not try to answer around it. Answer it directly. Now, as for our fourth core activity, this is on evaluating and mitigating risk. And we're told it's a key element of management of all types of entities in the real world. And that makes sense, doesn't it? Risk is a big part of just about any business, but especially at the strategic level is where it becomes very important as you are making business decisions at this point. Now, we are given a list of risks in the pre-scene, so something to bear in mind, but there are also others besides that you may be expected to know about Pixlwizz or apply from your wider knowledge. So the common ones might be security threats. They could be the hiring of technically skilled staff, but then also maybe keeping up with customer demands. Those are quite generic threats or risks to the business. So your job then is to explain how those risks might then apply to Pixlwizz's current circumstances. More specifically, when it comes to level 3, you need to be able to look at the risks presented in the question and offer a realistic response. Now, the key word in this whole paragraph is that while you need to give a realistic response, it needs to be proportionate. Saying that the whole IT infrastructure of a business needs to be completely redesigned in response to a phishing email is arguably a bit too extreme. Training and improving internal controls, however, would be more proportionate as a risk mitigation measure. So just bear that in mind. Don't go too overboard with risk responses. try to make sure it's measured and proportionate to the risk that has been presented. Because that again shows you're applying the question rather than just giving a generic answer that you could feasibly apply to any company, whether it works or doesn't. Then for level 1 answers, again, you failed to address the concerns directly. Going back to that point, you're not directly addressing the question, and as a result, you will not gain the highest marks. The examiners have specifically said that scripts will often offer checklists that are drawn from study text, and this checklist will probably include risks or responses that don't really make sense to Pixlwizz, and they don't really mitigate the risks that are being presented in a way that would be effective. So once again, application and relevance are key to this exam. Then lastly, our final core activity is on having sound controls in place to ensure threats to good governance are prevented and that potential issues that could reflect negatively on the business are dealt with proactively. So we're going to be quite quick on this one because it's the same stuff we're seeing over and over again. Level 3 answers show an appreciation of the scenario, the context of the scenario rather, and what has contributed to the control environment. So what factors have led to the current situation. This is then followed up by a response to those problems and being able to show how those issues can potentially be rectified in a way that makes sense. In contrast, level 1 is once again unapplied in the way it is answered. And I'll not repeat myself further, as you can see that of these 5 core activities, the common theme is as such. Level 3 answers at the end of the day are technically accurate. They directly answer the question, they offer logical responses to the problem presented, and they apply their answers back to the scenario. So with that said, we now have some final tips that the examiner would like to give us. So prior to the exam, as if it isn't clear enough to us already, that you must be able to apply your theoretical knowledge, right? You must be able to apply the syllabus and the theories that you've learned. But it's not enough to get you into the upper levels by just regurgitating that information. You need to also make sure you're capable of applying it as well. All right, it's vital, and in their words, it's vital that you can take it one step further and apply it to solving problems. So don't just regurgitate information you've learned. Make sure you understand what that information means in the real world and how it can be useful to solving real business problems. The other part is the pre-scene as well, the second tip. It's underappreciated. Make sure you're familiar with the pre-scene company and try to be familiar with, crucially, the big picture so that you can highlight the broad issues and, more importantly, help make your answer make strategic sense. The pre-scene is there to give you the context you need so that any answer you give will provide some sort of logical response. The third point then is that you need to make sure you can write credible answers to the case study exam. So the point here is that you should practice past papers basically. All right, practice past papers, make yourself familiar with the style of the question so that you're not caught off guard in the actual exam. Then as for during the exam, there are, 5 points worth mentioning. One is time management. Now, you may or may not be quite familiar with the time management process by this stage, but just as a reminder, you have 60 minutes to answer a task. If your task is 40%, right, this particular subtask is worth 40% of the marks for task 1, then you should be spending realistically 24 minutes on it. Spending more than that means that you're not spending time answering the perhaps 60% question that accompanies it, which means you're losing precious time and marks by not answering it. So make sure you split your time evenly, as that is the best way to maximize your marks. A common problem that the examiner has pointed out, and I've pointed out as well in videos like this before, is that you need to make sure you answer the question you are given. Do not answer the question that you want. Crucially, it says if a question asks about a problem facing Pixlwizz, then you'll need to make sure you answer that question directly. And in the same vein, you're asked to do something, if you're asked to do something in the question rather, you've got to make sure you do it. So if you're asked to give a recommendation, then you have to make sure you give a recommendation, because if you look at the mark scheme, you'll often find that a recommendation is half of the marks, right? If the subtask is split into 2 parts, then what you might find is that recommendation makes up a whole half of the marks for that particular subtask. And so failure to answer it means that you're potentially losing half the marks there. So read the question carefully, answer it directly, and crucially make sure you answer every activity that you're required to do in the exam, whether that be recommendations, evaluations, identifications, explanations. Make sure you answer all activities. Then there's also taking care to include real-world examples. CIMA do want you to give real-world examples, but as I said earlier, they have to be relevant. So be careful not to be a little bit overzealous and use examples everywhere if those examples are not relevant. It's better to use examples that are relevant to your response because they can help justify it and give you credit where it's due. Then lastly, there's information provided in the exam in the actual question, so try to use it. You don't have to, but it's often there to be used, and often it's a key to helping you apply your response. And you might be able to use that information as justifications for recommendations perhaps as well. So try to make use of the exam information where possible. And so with that brings us to the end of this interim report video. I and all the staff here at Astranti want to wish you the very best of luck in the SCS exam. And I hope you enjoyed that walk through the SCS interim report. And if you want to see more materials from us regarding the case study, you can go to astranti.com, where we offer a full range of case study materials, including videos and study texts that you will find useful when revising for the case study exam. And if you want to stay in contact with us, we have a variety of social media channels you can subscribe to, which include Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and finally, YouTube.